Welcome to DLS's teacher training module, Introduction to the ILR Listening Scale. This presentation will familiarize you with the ILR listening scale. Listening skills in general are often overlooked in the classroom. It is expected that students will just pick them up while learning the language. However, there are special features of listening in a foreign language that teachers should keep in mind. And listening, along with reading, is how language learners get input. Without effective and plentiful input in the new language, students will not be able to make good progress. So, it is really important to include special listening practice in the classroom. Let's start with the objectives. By the end of this session, you will know what the ILR scale is and what it is used for, understand how listening skills are evaluated at ILR levels 0 plus to 3, and be able to apply this knowledge to track students' progress in planning lessons in your classroom. How can learners be tested on their listening skills? What kind of activities and tasks can we use to improve students' listening? In this section, we will discuss what the ILR scale is, what it measures, and what principles shape it. There is a specific logic behind the ILR scale, and once you understand the logic of the whole, you can see how the different parts fit together. If you have done the teacher training modules on ILR speaking and reading, you will see that the ILR scale for listening is very similar. There are just a few special features that go along with listening. The ILR has developed scales as a unified standard to help different parts of the government talk to each other about language skills. Since nearly all government agencies use the ILR scale, they can measure the language skills people have or need to have, and everybody uses the same vocabulary and knows what the levels mean. There are scales for each of the 4 skills of traditional language teaching: speaking, listening, writing, and reading. For our work, the important ILR scales are speaking, reading, and listening. Writing is usually not emphasized in courses at DLS, and our students will seldom need to write in a foreign language as part of their jobs. In a way, the ILR scale is like a ruler. Instead of inches or centimeters, it has levels, and the levels are numbered 0 to 5. 0 means no proficiency, or maybe just a few words like buenos dias or sayonara. At the top we have level 5, which is the proficiency of a well-educated, highly articulate native speaker. Not just a native speaker, but a native speaker who has a lot of education and who speaks very well. It's important to keep in mind that most people are not at level 5 even in their native language. The scale also has plus levels between 0 and 5. You might think a 1 plus is supposed to be halfway between 1 and 2, but not on this scale. We will talk about the special meaning of the plus levels towards the end of this presentation. It is important to remember that this scale is entirely proficiency based. The word proficiency here refers to what somebody can do using the language, and not what somebody knows about the language. What kind of real-world tasks can this person handle in a foreign language? For example, in listening, can this person tell a question from a statement? In different languages, intonation, word order, or special particles might be used to form questions. But knowing the rules about these things is not the same as being able to distinguish a question when you hear one. In fact, most native speakers have very little awareness of the rules for their language, but they are proficient in their language. Now take a few minutes and make a short list of things that make language easy or hard to understand. We want to think about language that somebody hears, either in conversation or from a recording. Use your own experience with different languages to come up with ideas. When is spoken language easy to understand? When is it hard to understand? Pause the video while you make your list and resume when you are ready to continue. We provided the first one. How familiar is the listener with the language in general? This includes things like vocabulary and grammar, which also go into reading comprehension. Another possible answer would be topics. Similar to reading, it is easier to understand what you are hearing if you are familiar with the topic being discussed. Listening speed is another factor, and one unique to listening. Does the speaker talk slowly or quickly? Do they speak in a less familiar way, for example, in an unfamiliar dialect? It is usually much easier for students to understand the standard spoken dialect, like that found in national media broadcasts, than some native speakers' dialects. In face-to-face conversations, you can usually ask for clarification or repetition if you did not understand what was said. But if you are watching a video or listening to an audio, that is not possible. So listening is harder when it is non-participator, or when you cannot interact with the people speaking. Background noise can also impact listening comprehension. It is harder to listen when you cannot hear well. But native speakers and people who know a language very well are much better at listening and understanding in unfavorable conditions. Listening involves not just the ears, but the brain as well. Now it's time to look at the definitions of the levels. We will cover base levels up to level 3. Remember that level 0 plus is considered a base level even though it has a plus sign. At the end of this presentation, we will talk a little about listening proficiency above level 3. 0 means 0. A person at level 0 has virtually no ability to understand spoken language, and almost nothing is also 0 on the ILR scale. A person might be able to pick out just a few words spoken in a foreign language, like names or common words, but still be a level 0. 0 plus is the level of memorized proficiency. The learner has memorized some parts of language, like useful words and phrases, and can understand them when they are said by a native speaker. Phrases must be spoken in a context that helps the listener to understand what is meant. Usually, they need to be spoken slower than normal with added pauses. Often, the memorized phrases need to be repeated before the 0 plus learner recognizes them. And, because learners at 0 plus are still not accustomed to the sounds of the language, there will be mistakes, sometimes confusing one word with another. Think for a moment about the sounds of language. In every language, there is a limited set of sounds that can be used to distinguish between different words. One word might sound exactly the same as another, except for one critical, distinctive sound. If the learner has trouble hearing the difference, there can be confusion. Here is an example from English. There are two pairs of pictures, and you can try to think of the words you would associate with each picture. There are sounds here that English learners sometimes have trouble distinguishing. The first pair is ships and chips. For speakers of some languages, there can be difficulty with telling the first sounds in each word, the sh in chips and the ch in chips, apart. The other pair is Texas and taxes. These two are the same except for the vowel sounds e and a, and speakers of many languages can have trouble with these. Here's an example of how being unable to distinguish individual sounds can lead to misunderstanding in a real sentence. Why is she leaving there? And why is she living there? Are two ordinary questions somebody might ask, but understanding which is said depends on distinguishing the vowel sounds in living and leaving. A level 0 plus listening might have trouble distinguishing which sound was said. For the levels from 1 to 3, we have a keyword for each to give a general idea and make things easy to remember. Moving up in the scale, we come to level 1, the survivor level. The scope has changed from the word level at 0 plus and reached the sentence level. Level 1 learners can understand speech about everyday needs, things that are said when getting meals, arranging transportation, and so on. They can understand the courtesy phrases people commonly use and very simple everyday conversations. Level 1 learners will usually understand only the standard dialect and will need people to speak more slowly and clearly than usual. They may need things to be repeated or reworded, and they may misunderstand at times because they have limited knowledge of the grammar and syntax of the target language. For example, you might ask somebody who works in a grocery store, "Where would the honey be?" It's a little more polite than asking, "Where is the honey?" but is also a bit more complicated since is turns into be and moves to the end of the sentence. Somebody who is not strong in English could hear honeybee and wonder why you are asking about insects. Continuing up the scale, we come to level 2, the storyteller level. If you have completed the ILR speaking training, you will remember that level 2 speaker is nicknamed the storyteller because they can tell stories or connected sentences about everyday happenings. From the listening perspective, a level 2 listener can understand those stories, not just sentences, but spoken paragraphs. The level 2 learner is comfortable with ordinary social chat and also casual conversations about current events or routine work matters. Usually, a level 2 learner is able to handle most face-to-face conversation with people who speak the standard dialect. They can understand people speaking at the normal pace, although sometimes repetition or paraphrasing may be needed. Notice also that a level 2 speaker is expected to understand some words and phrases when listening conditions are not ideal. We can think of listening comprehension as picking up a signal. Then we decode the signal and understand what is being said. But in life and at work, we often have to listen to a signal that is weak or distorted. Voices over loudspeakers can be hard to understand. For learners at early stages, even a voice on the telephone can be harder to understand than a face-to-face conversation. At lower levels, the signal must be loud and clear if the learner is to understand. At higher levels of listening proficiency, learners are expected to understand more and more when listening conditions are not ideal. As listening proficiency improves, starting from level 2, the learner will be able to understand more and more when listening in unfavorable conditions. Comparisons of native speakers with language learners show that the native speakers are much better at hearing when there are problems with the signal. And of course, it's not because the native speakers have better ears. It's because they are much better able to guess to fill in the gaps to get the message. Coming back to the ILR listening scale, we are ready for a look at level 3. This is the thinker level. No, we don't mean that people at lower proficiency levels can't think, but thinker is a good nickname for this level because it requires being able to understand speech about abstract and hypothetical topics. A level 3 listener is able to listen to connected discourse, a series of paragraphs linked together, a detailed discussion of some topic. At level 3, the learner is able to handle all listening tasks that are common in everyday life and work. They can understand face-to-face conversations with normal clarity and speed in a standard dialect on general topics and some specialized topics of interest. Level 3 listeners can usually follow a conversation among native speakers speaking at the normal pace and rarely need to ask for rephrasing or explanations. They can also understand speech that is reasonably clear coming from radio or TV, the phone, or from other indirect sources. At level 3, listeners can understand hypotheses and opinions. They can often pick up on the emotional overtones of what people are saying. Are they being polite or rude? Are they joking? Are they irritated or impatient? They can also understand implications. Even so, level 3 listeners still have trouble with someone speaking very quickly or if someone is using slang or speaking in a non-standard dialect. Looking again at the scope, we see that level 3 is the discourse level. So, at level 3, people are able to listen to longer texts, like a whole story on the news or a lecture. They can keep track and follow along as different points are brought up and understand the connection between the parts of the text. Now let's take a minute to review what we have covered so far. Here are 9 statements from learners about their listening skills. Each statement is typical of a level 1, 2, or 3 speaker. There are no level 0 plus statements. Take a moment to decide the correct level for each statement. Pause the video while you work and resume when you are ready to review your answers. What ILR level did you choose for each statement? For the first statement, the learner can understand slow and clear speech, which tells us they are a level 1 listener. The second statement says they can follow all native speaker conversations at a normal pace. That indicates level 3. Next, The third listener can follow directions and uncomplicated stories. They are a typical level 2. Statement 4 mentions discussions of ideas and concepts or extended discourse, which is a level 3 ability. The fifth statement understands the standard dialect at a normal pace, but may need some repetition or rephrasing, which places this learner at a level 2. Number 6 mentions detecting a speaker's attitudes and feelings, which is something listeners begin to do at level 3. Statement 7 mentions understanding simple statements about personal backgrounds and occupations, which are survival level skills, a level 1. The 8th statement understands slow, clear speech with some repetition or rephrasing, which also indicates level 1. The final statement says that the listener can understand basic facts from a short news report. Since this is not extended discourse, it is level 2. Now let's look at some basic ideas about teaching listening. We will go level by level. At level 0 plus, it's important to make sure that students can hear all the distinctive sounds in your language. You will want your student to be able to make these sounds, to pronounce the words so they will be correctly understood. But listening can be the first step. It should be easier than speaking. Make sure your student can hear the difference between words. For example, speakers of some languages have trouble distinguishing V from W in English. You could practice by saying the words yourself and having the student point to the correct picture. Once the student is a level 1, it's time to start speaking at the normal pace in your language. Don't use slow or extra clear pronunciation. Instead, say things normally and let the student ask you to slow down or repeat if needed. If the student misunderstands because of trouble with the grammar or syntax, don't stop and explain. Instead, let the student try to work out what you are really saying. The explanation can come later, or it may be something you don't even need to discuss at this point in the learning. At level 2, it's very important to listen to different voices. Luckily, with the internet, you have great resources for doing this. Short news reports should be included at this point, but not summaries of the daily news. That jumps from topic to topic and goes beyond what a level 2 learner will be able to do. Level 2 is when you should start to include recordings that have background noise or some voice distortion. This will cause problems and the student is likely to complain. But without practice, the student will never learn to pick up the meaning with less than ideal listening conditions. Every language teacher has had the experience of introducing some authentic listening, only to have the student say, "I can't understand anything." It's certainly not time to give up when that happens and go back to teaching grammar. It's time to use an important tool called scaffolding. Like scaffolding on a building can help workers reach parts of buildings previously out of reach, scaffolding in learning teaching can help your students accomplish language tasks that might initially seem beyond them. To do scaffolded listening, you start off with some background information to get the student thinking about the topic. One thing to try is to have students watch a video without the sound and then guess what the video is about and what words it is likely to contain. In our native language, we listen to something once and then we are done with it. We wouldn't want to hear the same thing again. But for learners, repeated listening is very important. The best way to do this is to prepare a series of tasks, starting with easier tasks first and moving on to more complicated and difficult ones. Each task requires listening once again. The tasks can be very simple. For example, beginning listeners could write down all the numbers that are mentioned in this piece, or identify the different people who are speaking, a mother, a policeman, the mayor of the city. Higher level listeners could do activities that require more detailed comprehension. Every time the students listen to the audio again, they will increase their understanding. Even so, students will probably not understand every word and sentence in an authentic piece of listening. This is a good thing. Students will not always catch every word when listening in the real world. They must build the ability to catch the main point and important details, and they also need to become confident in their listening skills. Finally, at level 3, the student should be listening to longer pieces, up to about 5 minutes. The listening material should be more about abstract topics and include opinions. It will also have less lively video support. A story about an auto race can be exciting to watch, but it's probably not at level 3. A televised debate is not likely to have a lot of action, and if there are explosions, they are going to be between political rivals, but the level of dialogue will be closer to the material a level 3 listener is ready to hear. Since the student is practicing listening to extended discourse, having them create a summary at the end is good practice. Even at level 3, repeated listening with scaffolding activities will be helpful. But don't ask students for a complete translation. That takes a lot of time and is not usually worth it. Let's quickly look now at listening skills above level 3. Most students at DLS are not going to be working above level 3, but people with higher level listening skills can understand speech involving very fast, colloquial speech, possibly including slang expressions, dialects, or unusual accents, jokes and puns, or overheard speech. This is a situation where you hear something not intended for you, like the conversation of people at the next table in a restaurant. You have no background on the topic and have to put everything together from clues you pick up. And finally, understanding when the source is weak, distorted, or disturbed. Only a few of the best learners come close to the ability native speakers have in doing such things. That concludes the teacher training module for the ILR listening scale. If you have any questions, please contact your language training supervisor.